Yeah, I do have scissors. If you want to open it, that'd be cool. Because I don't know if I mean, I don't know that everyone needs to see me do that. Thank you for coming. I'm Julie Bawden Davis. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm so happy that we got rain, and it's such a beautiful day now. And how many places in the United States can you say would be looking like this on a February day, right? And feeling like this. I am a garden author and master gardener, University of California Cooperative Extension Master Gardener. And I have been gardening since I was 7. And it all started when I met and fell in love with a coleus plant that I found in the I found in the drugstore. That was in 1970s, so there was houseplants everywhere and macrame hangers, which I proceeded to learn how to make as well. So, and at the time I was living on the East Coast, although I was born here, but I'm a Navy brat, so I ended up many other places. And when it was time to when I was time to go to college and I was growing up, uh, I decided I was going to come back to California. One of the reasons was because I knew it was a good place to garden because I had tried these other places to garden, including on the East Coast, and that's where I, as mentioned, was growing coleus when I was young, and I had filled up my entire house. Fortunately, my parents didn't seem to notice, or they did. Every window in the house had house plants in it, so that's how I got started. When I moved back here after roaming the planet for those years, I I got initially I was in apartments and I was going to school. I got a degree in journalism. I am an author of many gardening books. These are all my books here, and they're available for, and they can be autographed afterwards. The when I did settle down though in Orange, and when I walked into, I live in Old Town Orange. I walked into this historic home. At the time, I was just renting. Okay, so I proceeded to go to the nursery, and I went home and I planted the strawberries, and the strawberry plants were full of berries. Planted them, ate them all, the ones on the plant. And soil, which I didn't quite understand the significance of doing that as well. So I will never. And at the time, had started writing for the LA Times. I had a garden column with the LA Times for a decade, and it was the Orange County edition. I remember thinking, okay, this is embarrassing because I'm writing this column and there's a strawberry field right down the street, and it's full of strawberries. And what's going on here? Why is this not happening? Why did I plant this plant? It looked fine. Now it's not looking fine. Now it doesn't have berries, etc. So I started to do a little research, and that's how this actually my book, The Strawberry Story: How to Grow Great Berries in Southern California, came to be, because I started doing some research and discovered that it's all, first of all, and I'm going to do an overview of how to grow them, and then I'm going to show you a planting as well today. I discovered that the two main problems I was having was, number one, they don't like our clay soil. They like it alkaline, on the alkaline side. So that's I think the range is 5.5 to 6.7. It's in my book. I should know. Yeah, that's so very alkaline, right? We have very on the acidic side. We're very alkaline here. Okay, so the problem with planting a plant that likes alkaline soil, and it doesn't matter how much you fertilize, not acidify the soil, but how much you fertilize, the plant will never produce properly, because what happens when the pH is off is the soil will not release fertilizer to the plant. So you can be fertilizing away until the cows come home, which they probably wouldn't do here, but you get the analogy. And it's never going to do anything. So the pH has to be perfect. for the strawberries, within that range, right? So given the fact that we have alkaline soil, and it's also high in salt, which they also don't like, and our water is also on the alkaline side, you can see the problem here, right? So that's why the growing in the ground is difficult. That's why they do have them up. They do a lot with the fields when they grow them. That's why they have them on mounds so that the salts and things can wash away, wash down. So I discovered that. I thought, okay, well then I'm going to try growing them in the containers, and they do really well in containers. And I'm going to be planting today in a container. The other issue, which is something that people don't realize, and I found out because I called the University of California, Davis, and started talking to the strawberry experts there. They've had a strawberry research facility there for decades. It's critical that you grow the right varieties for our climate. So what happens is, and this is especially the problem with big box stores, so not here, but big box stores, is you go, and you may have had this happen. There's, as I mentioned, those beautiful berries on the plant, and you think, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the plant for me, and this will bear fruit for years for me. But it doesn't have a label, so you're not really clear what type, but you think that's okay because it's got lots of berries on it. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to plant it. I'm going to eat these all, and then they're going to make lots more for me, but they don't because it's the wrong type of berry. And you don't even know what type of berry it is. So a lot of times it could be a berry that does really well, say in Ohio. A lot of plants, at least at one point, were coming from Ohio. Well, you can see the problem. We're not Ohio. It's just not going to happen here. The Ohio climate. So that's what occurs. You plant and it budded up where it was in the greenhouse where they were growing it. So that's why you have those berries initially, but then that's why you won't have any more berries. So you can look at that plant and I remember when I was growing plants like that and I was taking such good care of it and the leaves look so pretty, and you can eat the leaves, but that's generally not what you want to do with a strawberry plant. And it just wouldn't bear. So I found out, oh, okay, so now if you grow the right varieties, then you can grow them. You can have really good luck in Southern California with strawberries, which makes sense because 70% of the strawberries grown in the United States are grown in our state, right? So that's where it's a little bit confusing when you go to plant and then they don't grow because you're growing the wrong variety. I do have in my book lists of the different varieties. I'm going to go through the various varieties for you right now, and then discuss, like I said, a little bit more on the growing. And then I think it's really great. I'm going to be doing a planting demonstration because this is a lot of times where people will have questions. Oh, can I get some water? Just to be ready for that. Thank you. I might need a little more. But I only brought that little thing. So the types. So there's basically four main types of strawberries. There's the June bearing strawberries and Sequoia, which they do have here. I think I saw that, right? Yeah, so this is a Sequoia. And you can see these are all traditional. I call them traditional berries. They all of the leaves look the same, right? It's not like some plants where you could distinguish between the leaves or the flowers. So therein lies the problem when you go somewhere and they're not labeled. So that's where I suggest, like, if you don't know what it is, then don't put all the time and energy and money into planting it, right? So the Sequoia is what's known as a June bearer, and it's known as a June bearer because in other areas of the country, they tend to bear fruit in June. That's because they have they have winters, first of all, and it doesn't tend to get warm until like May, right? And that's when the plants will come out of their dormancy or dormant type of state and start producing. But here we generally get the berries more like March, April, depending on how our quote winter has been. Okay. And as I was mentioning to these lovely ladies here, one of my missions, my main mission with all of this is to teach people how to grow in Southern California. there's lots and lots out there on how to grow in other areas of the country. Actually, I was accessing a lot of that before I wrote the strawberry book, uh, and even when I first started. And you may have experienced this uh, during spring rains, during fall rains, and you're looking outside, and the Santa Anas are blowing everything around in circles, and I don't see any rain in sight. All I see is a lot of destruction. It's really important to know, and this is a very different climate to grow in. I had a woman come 2 weekends ago when I spoke about strawberries, actually, and she was from another state. I'm trying to remember, was it Missouri and she said she's been trying for several years to figure this out here, because there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to our climate, right? Well, there is, but it's completely different. You have to turn everything on its head, basically, than other areas. So back to the June bearing sequoia. We'll start to get flowers. Even now, I mean, you see there's flowers on these plants, but that isn't always, as I mentioned, an indicator of what's going on here, because they do bud things up in greenhouses generally, or at least in growing grounds, right? And that's their job, to get these things to start flowering so they can bring them to the nursery, so that you will look at the flowers and then you will buy it, right? But generally speaking, April, May, you'll get the the sequoia. And they're a really nice, big, traditional, good-sized berry. The thing about them, though, is they generally only will produce once a year. Sometimes they'll produce maybe 2 crops, one big one and one smaller one, but basically that's it. So you have to keep it alive throughout the hot summer, which you can do, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But basically, don't expect anything from it until the following spring, late winter, early spring. Now, the other class there's also ever-bearing types, and those are also listed in my book. Those are a kind of a cross between day neutrals, which I'm going to talk about, and the June bearers that I just mentioned. And then there are not as many of those that you can grow here, but what you can grow here, what I always suggest people grow here, and these are ever-bearing, but they also are the day-neutral variety. And day-neutral refers to not affected by day length. So to give you an example, fruiting trees, for instance, that are affected by daylight are the deciduous fruit trees, a lot of the stone fruits, where they become deciduous in the winter months. And then when the days start to lengthen in the spring, that's when they start to get leaves and bud up, and that's when they produce their fruit. So there's strawberries that are day neutral, seascape being one of them, and they do have them here. And the seascape is my favorite because it is it's just so reliable. And to give you an example of how reliable it is, they still grow it. I've still found it growing in strawberry fields, and that's saying a lot, because generally what will happen, the strawberry growers, it's similar to roses, where you hear about, this is a new rose, this is a new rose, this is a new rose. So the strawberry growers, and especially the strawberries developers who are developing the strawberries and hybridizing and that sort of thing, they want to create the next best strawberry, right? And generally speaking, it's not for us home gardeners, but it's for the commercial trade. So they want the strawberry that is that transports well, but looks beautiful, but tastes beautiful, but it's nice and soft, and it's full, and it's this and it's that. So they keep trying, but they still haven't been able to best the seascape strawberry. So they still will grow them in the fields, and they're excellent for home production. They do bear, because they're day neutral, they're not affected by daylight, they keep producing throughout the year. So that's the significance of that. And so what happens is, you can get them in, I've had them on Christmas morning, And I've had them on very hot days in the garden as well. They will produce between 39 degrees Fahrenheit and I believe 85. So that's a huge range, and they actually grow in other areas of the country too. So it's a nice, good sized berry, and it has a really good flavor. So it's 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 just a really good producer. Another one they came up with several years ago was Albion. Now the Albion is not. I trialed it for quite a while. It's not as reliable. It does well when we get really really hot, which is good. And I noticed that characteristic with it. So I did do some research, called up one of the wholesalers, and asked where it was from, like where was it trialed, because I had been having these problems because we weren't having a really hot summer and it wasn't doing a lot, but then another summer it was doing really well. And then I was told in Riverside. Okay, well, I know we get hot here, but we're not quite Riverside. So that explains it. So keeping that in mind, it is a day neutral, but you're going to it's not going to be as productive. It doesn't have that wide of a range. I'm not sure what the range is. I wasn't given the range, but my guess is it would not be it's not going to be on the cooler side. So those are good ones to grow. And so, and just so you know, when you're growing the variety, and to me, it just makes sense, right? Because we know when we're buying a peach tree, what kind of a peach tree it is and when it's going to produce, but they haven't had as much data out there onto, okay, what does this strawberry do? Because people just assume it's a strawberry plant, it'll grow, right? It's California, the strawberry plant will grow, but not the case as mentioned. Now, the other class of strawberries is the alpine strawberry. And these are a gourmet-like strawberry. They're a small berry, so you can pass that around. That shows you what they look like. And I actually was able to, this morning, I don't know if we want to raffle off tasting these, but I was able to, if you want to pass those around, I was able to do a little harvest of some alpine strawberries. These are really, really cool. The white ones, there's white, there's yellow, and there's red. And the red tastes like a cross between a raspberry and a strawberry. And the white can only be described as candy. And then Chris describes it as candy with floral tones, which I would agree with. And then the yellow tastes like pineapple. And they can only be grown from seed, and they do have seed here. This one looks like it's a red and yellow Wonder Blend. I don't think they have the white. The white is a little more difficult to find. It's very fun to grow. You have to have lots of patience, but it's definitely worth it. And I had given Chris one several years ago. And he fell in love with them, and he now grows them all the time too, and then got seeds here and everything. So those are the types. Now, as I mentioned before, the soil is really, really important. So the pH has to be right. The easiest way to do that is to grow them in containers. You can try the ground, but because of they like excellent drainage, and they don't do well with the alkaline soil. They don't do the alkaline water. There's not a whole bunch you can do about that. Well, there is things you can do. I'll discuss that in a minute, but it's just the easiest. And the other thing is it's not like a big tree. They're a very small plant. The cool thing is too, when you have them budding up, when you have fruit on them, then you can put them, so you're having a barbecue, you can put them in the center of the table. And of course, when everyone comments on them, you say, oh yes, those are just my organic day neutral strawberries, and I have them all year long. Would you like one? So it's just really fun to grow them in containers. And as mentioned, I'm going to be planting in this very soon as well for you guys to see. The nice thing is the potting soils are supposed to be, and generally speaking, are at neutral. So when you add an organic fertilizer, a little bit of organic fertilizer, and especially acidic fertilizer to the soil, then you have the perfect combination. They also, as mentioned, need good drainage. So if you're, depending on what, the Pro Mix is very good, and that's my favorite. The To use, but if you're using another soil, the soil is really important. Okay, a lot of the soils out there are ground up bark. So if you've gotten soils where you're like, it's very heavy and look at it. If it looks like they put this through a shredder and it's just ground up bark, this is a problem, right? And it is a problem too, because people will think, well, it's soil, it's potting soil, it's in this container. I mean, it's in this bag. It should be perfect for my strawberry plants. Not necessarily. It's not actually not perfect for a lot of plants. A lot of times it makes a better amendment, like a mulch. So you can use those as mulches, but they're not. And the problem with they're very porous, so the water just rushes through, right? Nothing for the roots to grab onto. And then it doesn't hold nutrients. So if you've had a problem with soil, now you know what the problem was. The soils that are good, they have either core in them or they have peat moss. And this is peat moss based. Now there is some controversy over peat moss and using the peat bogs. And I did look into that. The peat does it does continue to produce more peat. It's not like one of those things where it's going to take 1,000 years to reproduce this peat, that sort of thing. So I use products with peat moss. I also use products with core in them. Core is it comes from coconut husk. The core is a little more porous, so it doesn't have quite that same water retention as the peat moss does. So you have the peat moss in products. So that's what you want to look for, because if it's just like I mentioned, all ground up bark, there's not going to be any water holding capacity. Because what you want for the strawberries is water holding capacity, but as well as drainage. I believe this has in it perlite. I prefer pumice, which they do have here too. Pumice is a lava rock. It's heavier. It stays in the pot rather than floating up to the surface, because the perlite is very lightweight. But either way, you can plant directly in the Pro Mix. A lot of things in the Pro Mix. Now, if you are going to plant in the ground, you want to make sure the drainage is excellent. So one thing you can do is use a bunch of the pumice in the soil. And I actually use a lot of pumice when I'm planting trees in my clay soil as well. Years ago, they would have us add amendments to soil before planting a tree, but then they discovered that, oh, that's not such a good idea, because what happens is our clay soil immediately pretty much eats up all that compost and you're back to clay again, right? But the problem is when you put the tree in, it thinks, oh, this is a nice, happy, composty place, but it's not. So then you would have root rot and the roots would get suffocated. But one thing you can use is the pumice, because it's not going to break down. It's going to be there for 20 years from now. When you dig up that tree, you're going to find that pumice in there. It's not going to have broken down. So it's a really good addition to the ground, and even container planting as well. Now, location. They do need full sun. Now, full sun doesn't need. I had one gentleman call me once and say, I got up at 6 and the sun was there, but at 2 the sun was gone. Is that not full sun? No, so basically what you want is a minimum of 6 hours of bright light per day. So 6 to 8 to 10 is fine. Now, with the strawberries, they are a small plant. If they dry out, they don't always come back, or they're not doing too good for quite a while afterwards. So you don't want to drought them. So that being said, when we have, depending on where you live, when we have the days where it's 95 degrees, 100 degrees, they really don't want to be out in that, as most of us don't, right? So you don't necessarily need them in a place that's going to get that sun up to sundown sun, okay? Now, if the only place that makes sense for you is there, then I would suggest using umbrellas and stuff like that when we have our hottest months in usually around mid-July until mid-September are the hottest, more scorching months. Now, if you're growing them in containers, it's very simple, right? You just move the container to somewhere that's more protected. So they can do well in dappled sunlight to a certain extent, but it has to be pretty well dappled. Now, the alpines, however, those are really good. They like bright shade. They like morning sun. They like dappled sunlight. You don't want to have them in afternoon sunlight for sure. So that they're another option. You don't want to mix the alpines and the traditional size berries in the same containers or the same area because of the sun requirements. So, and now if you don't get the strawberries enough sun, they're not going to produce as many berries. But believe it or not, the seascape I've had in areas that weren't just because I maybe stuck a pot somewhere and then, forgot about it for a while. They still will produce some berries. So they're pretty versatile that way too. Strawberries are. So, but like I mentioned, sun for the traditional sized berries. The good in the soil, in the ground, good drainage, but also another thing to remember with the drainage in the ground is you're also going to need to acidify the soil. And you guys have soil sulfur, right? Soil, yeah. So it comes in a pelleted form. The soil sulfur, and actually you want to add some soil sulfur to your to your container even on a periodic basis as well to make sure that the soil is acidified. A good thing to do if you're not sure what's going on is to test the soil and with a soil testing kit. Do you guys have the soil testing kits? Okay. So they do, I've seen them here. So yeah, you do have them sometimes. Now there are the probes, but I don't trust those because you really need like a very expensive, high powered probe to probing the soil. So I don't know that I would trust that, but the testing kits, you use distilled water, which is very important because distilled water is not alkaline or acidic. It's neutral. And then you take some of your soil and you mix it up, and then you put this liquid in there, and it's going to tell you if you're acidic or alkaline. Now, it's not going to tell you down to, you have to look at a color chart. So if you're colorblind, you'll have to find somebody to help you out. Actually, I've been working with a gardener on his indoor plants, and he's colorblind. So I've been trying to figure out different ways to help with that because he's even cutting things and he's not sure because he can't see green. He can't see if it's green anyway. So that is a thing. It is a bit challenging. I didn't realize. So so you can look at the chart. So, and if it's very alkaline, you're going to like, whoa, that's really, really alkaline, right? As I mentioned, make sure to use distilled water because I've had people use tap water, which is very alkaline, and they almost had a heart attack, but because so you don't need to do that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You can do that, and it's good to do that periodically, especially maybe in your container. So the thing about it is when the pH is off, the plant's not going to grow that great. When you see that small spindly growth, when the leaves come out, they're very small, and it's just like, why is this thing not doing what it's supposed to do? It's not growing right. It's just not growing right. That can be generally one of two things. The pH is off, or the drainage is poor and the roots are compromised. So those are two things to keep in mind. So that's good for the soil. I think I've covered the soil. The watering, got another noisy thing here. The watering, we're going to need to cover watering next. Okay. So as I mentioned, the watering is very important. Obviously, it's okay. It's fine. Yeah, just go ahead. Those things are really handy, but they do get noisy. The watering is really important. So you don't want to overwater and you don't want to underwater. As I mentioned, if they get droughted, they don't do well. One thing they will do is, as soon as they get droughted, is they will drop their fruit, or they will stop, the fruit production will stop. So remembering that the fruit, strawberries, and most fruits are primarily based on water. So when you have fruit on the plant, it's going to be drinking a lot more water. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So are these drought tolerant plants? No, they are not. Fruit is not drought tolerant. There are people that try to, say you can have a drought tolerant fruit garden. It's not, no. But the good news is, if you've got a little container like this, we're not talking about that much water, right? What I do actually is, if you've noticed too, when people drink water, people ask for water at your house, there's always half a thing of water left after I have a watering can that I pour the water into after people have done all their, let me have some water. And believe it or not, a lot of times it'll be enough for one of these pots each day. So there's different ways you can do, and it's not, these are small plants. They're not going to be sucking up tons and tons of water, right? Obviously, growing them in the ground, they retain water better, but it is more of a challenge, as mentioned. But it's up to what you'd like to do. So then also overwatering. They do not do well with overwatering. They will succumb to root rot, and then they will go down. They also succumb to crown rot. So those are problems there. Fertilizing, I hadn't had a chance to look at this fertilizer here. So you want an organic fertilizer. First of all, this is an organic, and it is a berry food, so it looks like it'll be good. Okay, good, and it has some good stuff in it as well. Okay, so the organics, really important, especially with strawberries, just across the board important. I use all organics. When you're using the chemical fertilizers, so the chemical fertilizers, the NPK on the front of the package, the numbers, those three numbers, that's the NPK, standing for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You want those numbers to be low. So when you see something like 20, 20, 20, 30, 30, 30, that is not an organic fertilizer. It's a chemical fertilizer. Yes, the chemical fertilizers they're fast acting, but what happens is you will get lots and lots of beautiful leaves. And I've had people ask, why are my strawberry leaves like this big, but I have no fruit? Because they were sucking up all of that nitrogen and growing pretty leaves for you, because nitrogen grows leaves. So it grows foliage. It's great for lettuce, but still having those really high numbers chemical fertilizer wise, there's multiple problems with it. The chemical fertilizers tend to burn roots. They're very high in salt. Now, organic fertilizers do have some salts, but the chemical ones have a lot more salt. We already, as I mentioned, have salty soil and salty water. So you can see where this is going. So you may get that flush of growth, but then all of a sudden the plant starts to dwindle and not look good. That's because the roots are dying back because of all the salts at the root zone. So it's just, I actually had someone who, I actually talk a lot about this whole thing in my book, Indoor Gardening the Organic Way. And I had someone, who wrote about my book and then mentioned how and I also likened this to, it basically, when you're giving them those chemical fertilizers, it's like you're giving them drugs, right? So, and that's what happens. Sometimes you'll get those beautiful plants that look some plants, even when you buy them, you think, this looks like a little too big. There's something not quite right. Well, that a lot of times it's because of all the chemical fertilizer. So you bring it home and you start acting normally and giving it its gourmet diet rather than the McDonald's diet, right? And then the plant starts to protest because it's not getting the chemical fertilizer. So basically they get hooked on it, and it's like a quick shot constantly that they need. But at the same time, it's breaking down the roots. So if you use organics, basically you're mimicking Mother Nature or Father Nature, and that way the plants will just be happy and healthy. So that being said, so this is an organic. I haven't used it before, but it looks like it's really good, and it's a berry food. And this has some really good ingredients too. So seabird guano. So the guanos are really good. They have the nitrogen. They also have phosphorus. So as I had mentioned, the nitrogen is what grows the foliage. The phosphorus and potassium is what grows the roots and what grows the fruit. So that's why it's so important. So you wouldn't want to use even an organic fertilizer that's very high in nitrogen and not as much of the phosphorus and potassium. You want it to be nice and well balanced. So the NPK on this guy is looks like 5-4-4, which is good. It also has some calcium and it has some sulfur, which I mentioned. That's for acidifying the soil. So this would be a good choice. Shrimp shell meal and crab shell meal is another good thing. Those tend to have. I also like which they have here, and it's not in here. And then there's some poultry manure, but there's no sludge or fillers. Okay, so another thing I really like is alfalfa meal. The reason I like alfalfa meal is because it's a natural growth hormone. I mentioned those plants that you get home and they flop over after a while because they're like, where's my drugs? Now, another thing that they will use, the growers will use, because once again, they're trying to get plants to grow well so that they can sell them more quickly, and then you guys will buy them, right? Are growth hormones. So they'll use chemical growth hormones on the plants. Well, the alfalfa meal is a natural growth hormone. So it's a good way to switch over, get the plant off of the McDonald's diet, as I mentioned, and onto your gourmet diet. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so there are pests and diseases. I do have lists in my book. There's not that many that really will cause a problem for you, to be honest. And that our bigger problems are that pH being off and under or over watering. And then the planting, how you plant is really important as well. So I'm going to do a planting demonstration right now. And if you guys, let's see, so you guys can see it. Let me see how I can do this. Make sure. And I'll be showing you as I go too. And then afterwards, if you want to come up and look as well. And I can also pass this around a little bit. Okay. Now they do have lots of good options in strawberries here. These ones that I mentioned would be good. So this is the sequoia, as mentioned, the June bear. This is the seascape. Another, Camarosa. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then also the Albion that I mentioned. So the Camarosa, it's a bigger berry. They were growing it in the strawberry fields it's probably been a couple decades now, but it was the big one, the new one in the strawberry fields. And then now the nice thing is they do all that work to get really good strawberries for the strawberry fields. And then we end up with really nice plants in the end, the ones that stick around. Chandler is another really nice one. That is a June bearing one. And that one was a superstar several decades ago. It's a nice, big, juicy berry, but it's pretty soft. So that's why it didn't last too long in the strawberry fields, because of the shipping. It just didn't ship as well. Okay, so you can get the plants already growing as starts, as already established plants. And then you can also, at this time of year, you can get bare root. A lot of nurseries don't carry them very much anymore, but you can get them online. Now, I often have questions about growing bare root, so I'm going to show you how to plant bare root as well. And then also I will be planting. So I'm going to do a combo in this container here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pass these around so you can pass one of these guys around so you can take a look at it. So this bare root basically means, it's funny how they come up with these different terms. It means there's no soil on the roots. It doesn't mean, I guess, so the roots are bare that way. But this is what the plant looks like. And it's sort of like it's in a semi-dormant state. Now, one thing I want to bring up as you're looking at that, this is really important. And if you can, the crown of the plant, When you plant a strawberry, you want to make sure that the crown, and the crown is the part that coming right directly out of the roots. This part, and you can feel it. You can feel it in that one if you can feel it's like kind of like a mound coming from that point. That needs to be exactly above the soil. This is one of the most important things to know about planting them. If you plant it too deep, so say you plant up to this green, you can get crown rot very easily because the soil is going to be surrounding it. If you plant too high where you've got roots showing, then you're going to have the plant drying out quickly. Not as big a deal at this time of year as mentioned, but once we get hot or we have one of those weird March or even February, it decided to be 85 degrees today, that kind of a thing. So that's the most critical part of planting the plant. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill this with soil, which hopefully doesn't take too long. with this Pro Mix. Oh, before I do that, handy little thing here that I do. So this is drywall tape, and I found that after different construction things, thank you. Different construction things, I found a lot of this laying around my house. And so I thought, what, this looks like it could be useful for something. I mean, obviously I'm not going to start constructing things. However, I figured out, this would make really good screen. So for, when you put the screen on the bottom of on the holes, right? So it does have kind of big squares. So I'll do it where I cross it over like that. So it makes this, makes the hole smaller, but it works really good. So this is a good thing to do at the bottom of pots. You're going to lose soil over time in your strawberry container, but at least this will keep the soil in longer. So this is another thing to do. Or you can use screen. They do sell screen, but honestly, it's kind of pricey like everything nowadays. And I thought, if you've got extra, if you happen to, it works. So putting this down on all of the holes, there's quite a few holes in here. That's another thing. Okay, with container grown plants, it's vital that you have good drainage, as mentioned. So you definitely don't want to be having the plant sit in a little lake. And a lot of times it's not a problem, but then we get like a rainstorm like we just did, and then you have a problem. So climbing over my water here. Okay. So I'm going to fill this up with soil almost to the top, but not quite. When you're planting in containers as well, you want to also moisten the soil. So I'm going to fill this, and then I'm going to moisten, because what happens if you don't moisten the soil? You plant and then everything sinks, and then the plants are too low in the container. When the plants are too low in the container, number one, you're not using all of the container and the soil, right? Number two, you start to get moist conditions down here because there's no air circulation, and you can get things like rot going on. And number three, it looks weird because the plants are all kind of funky because they're in different levels because there was no stability to when you started, if that makes sense. So lots of this, and you can see, I have some pumice here too. So you can see the pumice is nice and big. We're lucky here in California because the pumice comes from, generally speaking, from the Pacific Northwest. So it's easier for us to get it and not as expensive generally because it's not coming across the United States. All right, so yeah, you just, filling it. Now, in terms of container size, you can grow strawberries in just about any container. As long as it has drainage holes, you can use it. This is a good size. It's especially nice too because you can grow it in a row. So this is about, I would say, a foot. Would you say this is about a foot, right? Maybe around a foot. So at least 8 inches deep. Some of those bowls work as well. So you don't, it doesn't have to be a humongously gigantic pot like this deep because they aren't that deep rooted. We'll see if I don't knock this over. Trying to get going, get this done here. This Pro Mix too, you can just add some fertilizer to it, as I mentioned, over time. You can add soil sulfur over time. You really don't, it doesn't really need to be replaced. I mean, it will break down as all soils will, but it's not like you can just keep reusing it. So I'm mentioning that because it's probably one of the pricier soils to get, but if you're doing all this work, spending all this money on your containers and your plants and your this and your that, and then you're going to get soil that's not going to, the soil is the most important part for the plant because the roots are the most important part. It's not the prettiest part, it's not the part you see, but that's the part, right? So you can plant a beautiful plant, and if the soils aren't, the roots aren't sustained, the plant is not going to make it. And that's when the plant starts to look really yucky, and then you sneak it out one day, and so no one sees that, it didn't make it. So I'm adding a little more pumice. All right, now I'm going to use my water here. I'm going to moisten it. It takes a bit of time to moisten. You have to kind of stop, mix a bit. So you want it when you're done to loosely form a ball, and it's not quite doing that. So as a good rule of thumb. So you wouldn't want a big sloppy ball, but you'd want it to at least form a ball. Another good thing about doing the wetting before is that when you plant plants, and this is especially more of an issue with taller plants, they actually stay up. They're not falling down, right? Because the soil's holding them. Okay, so this looks like I did have enough in my little... But if I hadn't asked for the other one, I wouldn't, right? Murphy's Law. Okay, so that looks a little too precarious. Okay, so you can see I've got, it's a nice ball, but not, but you can break it easily. Okay, so I need a little more soil. So once, as I mentioned, once you get the water into it, then it tends to sink a bit. It's compact a little bit. I have twin sons and a daughter who's 3 years older. I'm always reminded when I'm doing this. I was on bed rest for, it was so hard because I couldn't go out to the garden. So I was on bed rest I went on bed rest at 26 weeks. I made it to 37 and a half weeks. My boys were big for twins. One was 8 pounds and one was 7.5 pounds. So did a good job. But I'm reminded if I had this friend of the family would came to work for me to help me. And basically one of the things is to do things in my garden, right? And so she was not really the gardening type, but she acquiesced and did it. And so I had her doing things with the compost and things. And then she said, What did she say to me? She said, I've just figured out you're doing all this because you like to play in the dirt. And I stopped and I thought I was just about ready to argue with her. And I said, you're right. I do actually like to play in the dirt. All right, looks like I am going to need to get into that other water after all. So you can see you just kind of keep doing this, playing in the dirt for a bit. Until you've got it. And you can always take a little bit out afterwards, but I just find it's easier to have enough before you start planting, because then you're planting and you're like, okay, great. Now I got to take the plant back out and add more soil, right? Okay, so I got this pretty good. Even it out a bit. Now I'm going to start with a couple, like this guy. I'm going to start with this. And it's good to wet the roots of the bare root. For years, I was at the green scene, many years. I would grow a bazillion of these bare root, but in 4-inch containers, and then sell them. So done this many times. Probably do it in my sleep. You don't have to, but I cut off those extra stems that were on there because they're really not going to do anything, just take up space. Then you also can cut the roots a little. You don't want to cut way back. It's going to shock the plant, and it takes a long time for the plant to come back, so it's not necessary. But depending on the depth of your pot, so I'm going to take a little bit off of here, but not a lot. And then this is a nice healthy one. Another thing to look for healthy roots. So say you're having a problem with your plants and you're not sure what's going on. Is it a root thing? You want the roots to be tan. Some plants, depend, not strawberries, but some plants will even look a little bit on the white side. That's good. When you see really dark, especially black, and really gushy, where you can squish them or they fall right off the crown, that's not a good sign. But these are, you can see, very healthy roots. They're a nice tan color. Okay, so you take this, make a hole, and then you put it in. And then that crown I mentioned to you. And if you want, again, I can show you close up too again. So what I'm doing here. So you can see I put it in, and like I said, I'm going to put it in right where the roots are right under the soil and the crown is right on top. So you do that, then you firm it around there. And I always, when I'm done, sometimes you can add a little bit more if you need to. And then I will feel it. And this is going to be the same with the already growing plants, which I'll show you in a minute, but you can see how it's, and if you want to feel it, go for it. Play in the dirt. So that's the best indicator. Like I said, when I was doing it, almost in my sleep, I would kind of just be feeling my way as I planted. But it was really funny because I would bring hundreds and hundreds of plants, and the other vendors would look at me like, "Oh, you're going to sell these?" And by Saturday afternoon, they were gone, and people would be like, "Oh my gosh, you were right." Yeah. Kind of like grass. Yeah. See this? Okay. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? To see where that part, yeah. You good? Okay, so now I'm going to plant, and all of these can be grown together. So any different varieties can be grown together. Now, if you are doing the June bearers, With the day neutrals, remember that some of the plants are going to be producing and some aren't. So I don't always encourage that. I would just do another one, a container with June bearers and container with day neutrals. So that being said, I'm going to do, I'm just, let's see, the Albion. Yeah. So I'm just going to do day neutral and not do the Sequoia. There's the Sequoia. So we've got the Albion, the Seascape, and the Camarosa is not day neutral, I don't think. I have to look in my book, but I'll have to check that. Okay, so here's the Albion. So similar kind of thing of what I just did, right? You can cut off leaves that are going. There's no point in having them there, just to clean it up some. Now this, on here you can see the roots are even white, which is good. So what'll happen, these are fine hair like roots so the roots that I showed you, those brown ones, what will happen when the plant starts to grow is little fine white ones will be coming off of the brown ones, and then they eventually will turn tan and become thicker, and then that's how it grows. So it's like a web of roots that's going on. So a good thing to, when you take it out of the container, is to look at the roots, and you can tell that those are very, very healthy roots. So as mentioned, cleaning up. It's also good to clean up any leaves that are dying on plants, because the foliage that is dying dead and dying back is the foliage that the pests will be attracted to, because that's the normal evolution. Say in the forest, the pests go to the decomposing leaves because that's their job, to decompose the leaves, and then they feed off the leaves and they continue the cycle of life, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Obviously we want that cycle, but we don't need to encourage that, the pests sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to do the same. Now this, another thing you want to check is, okay, so I'm looking at it, and you can see that the foliage is coming right out. So basically, generally speaking, when you're planting, you just plant at the same level that it was at, but checking it to make sure it doesn't look like the crown has been. And I can feel it on here, same sort of feeling as the other. Also, remember, the foliage will come from the center of the crown, come from the crown, and a lot of times from the center, and the leaves coming out are the more mature leaves. So a good indicator of a healthy plant and a plant that's doing well, I'll show you on this guy. So you see the leaves coming out of the center there? That's where they come out of. So that tells you, oh good, this plant is doing well, they're growing well, and they are, it's going to be good. So see the brand new leaves there. Because plants can look good, but if they don't have new growth, that's your sign that the plant is really healthy, is when they have new growth. Because they can be growing and then stop growing for some reason. So you want to see that new growth, especially when they're supposed to be growing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take this other one that looks really nice. So I've got two of the Albion. This is the Camarosa. Okay, so Seascape. So I'm going to take, and these are just, these will get tall too. These are just in different varying levels of growth. You can see there's strawberries on this one, so I'll go ahead and do this. Now there's a school of thought where you take all the, okay, yeah, I got to talk about this, where you take all the berries off of a plant when you plant it, so that the plant becomes stronger and creates stronger roots. And there's even some schools of thought where you continue to do this throughout its first season, so you don't get any berries. Remember, I like to play in the dirt, so I'm not really going to do that and not have berries. So when I first started growing strawberries, the very first time, I thought, no. I want these berries, so I'm not going to do that. I haven't seen the berry when I plant them, they do well. So I don't know that is that strawberry plants live for about 3 to 5 years. Okay, so I mean they will continue to live after that, but produce being good in production for you, it's only 3 to 5 years. So do you really want to get rid of the first year? Not really. So it's not necessary, and this isn't like a tree that you're going to have for the next 40 years, right? This is a strawberry plant. So not that I don't love them, but you see what I'm saying, right? So I don't take them off. Now, if you feel that you want to, well, you can, of course, but I'm just saying, I'm just letting you know that it's not. So, and then once again, that's something that you read about in other, not here, in other areas, right? Okay. So you make a hole when now that you have the soil nice in here, it's nice and firm. So I'm making a hole about as deep as the as the root ball, basically the root ball. Put it in, and then work the soil around. And I'm going to plant a couple more of these. Oh, and you want to obviously label them. I do have, I will use these guys, which my daughter made years ago, and then I'll write on the back. So you can do, this is a fun project for kids too, and then write on the back what it is and when I planted it as well. And it looks really pretty. So the Camarosa, this is my, better be, my book I can touch with dirty hands, yes, because I started to autograph it for someone, but I messed up. Okay, I'm looking for, so I'm thinking the Camarosa are, just so I can see here. Yeah, I think they are June bearers. Yeah, they're June bearers. That's what I thought. So Camarosa are June bearers. They use a lot of the June bearers in the fields because they want that really big first crop. And as you know, they don't garden throughout this. They don't garden grow the strawberries throughout the year. They just do it in the spring. Okay, so now as far as how close to put these, they can be grown very close together, and they actually like to be grown very close together. So 2 to 4 inches apart. And that's nice too, because you can really fill up a container really nicely with that too. So you have a lot of plants, because each of the strawberries will only grow a certain amount of strawberries per time, and then they have to bud up again and start producing again. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in here, but there is space to do like maybe a partial second row, which I'm going to do. I'm actually going to go ahead and do another bare root. Now the bare root, like I said, they're harder. It is a more inexpensive way to grow them, because they haven't done all of the growing for you, right? So, but it's only once a year at this time of year that you can get them. And actually, I order quite a few, and but I ordered them a few months ago. Okay, so I planted another one there. And then I'm going to plant 2 more here and do some more seascape. So the nice thing is too that the strawberries are very pretty plants. They have this nice green leaves, and then they get the pretty white flowers with the center, with the yellowy center. So they are very they are a very pretty plant in terms of being decorative for your garden as well. They do say that the foliage, the blossoms have a bit of a scent to them. And I have smelled that on occasion. It's not like it's a strong scent. I think there's more, maybe even more of a scent with the alpines. Okay, so I'm going to do one more over here, and then I'll show you guys. Oh, when you're taking it out of the container, squish the bottom as you, so you don't want to just go pull, because you're very easily will pull the foliage off of the roots. And once that's done, the plant is done pretty much. So another thing to keep in mind. So if you keep, and sometimes they'll be, if they're very root bound, they'll be kind of stuck in there. So you kind of have to keep squishy. It helps also to water them before. And actually you want to water, you want to make sure that any plants, and berries included, that they're well watered before you plant. And it should be, they either are moist from regular watering, or if it's a plant that maybe you don't water as much, so say it's a tree or something, a small tree or something, you want about 24 hours for it to hydrate. Because what happens when you plant any plants is they go into a temporary shock. When you plant them, they shut down. So they shut down. When they shut down like that, they shut down taking in water, right? So if you're you wouldn't want to take a really dry plant, put it in the soil and think, oh, well, I'll just water it right now. Well, it's not going to take up the water for several hours or even a day or two. So you can see the problem. You want it to be hydrated before you plant it. That way you're going to prevent transplant shock. And transplant shock can be fatal to plants. Strawberries are a little easier because generally we want to keep them moist anyway, so we wouldn't let them go dry. But the other I mentioned is more for other types of plants, especially something like a tree or something that you may not be watering as often. House plants as well, because you don't want to overwater them. So you want to work the soil down around each one. And then I'm going to water it afterwards. You want to soak it really well after. I'm going to walk this around now. So I'm going to water afterwards so it's not dribbling all over me. Okay. Even though, there's not that hasn't happened 1,000 times. So see, you can see there's quite a few in here. There's 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I could probably even have gone with 10. And then only in 4 to 6 weeks, you will have, just to show you guys, only in 4 to 6 weeks, you will start to have berries, especially the ones that have budded up.
Can you talk a little bit about strawberry pots?
Yes, thank you for the question about strawberry pots. I'm really glad you asked that. Okay. Yeah. So the good old strawberry pots, the strawberry pots, to the demise of strawberry plants. So these strawberry pots, especially the ones that are the terracotta, are very porous. And they also have little teeny weeny little pockets, right? Okay. So those pockets aren't really big enough for the strawberry roots. Number one. Number two, the strawberry pots dry out very quickly. So we have one hot afternoon. Maybe you're out at the grocery store. You think you're going to come back and have some strawberries, and you come back and the plants are drooping, and because they've dried out quickly. So the strawberry pots, generally speaking, aren't a really good choice for strawberries. They're a better choice for fast draining herbs, succulents, cactus. I have a cactus growing out of which looks kind of cool, that I grew from seed. So that's something you can do. The succulents, as mentioned, any type of plants that do well in crevices. So for instance, alyssum will work. Some of the flowers will work. So you can make a really pretty statement with a strawberry pot, but just preferably not strawberries. Now, the strawberry pots this is one thing you could do if you really want to use your strawberry pot for strawberries, which is understandable. And that is that you could plant June bearers, because the strawberry, when we have weather like this, it's not going to dry out. As we know, it's when we get hot and everything, and then the humidity drops really low, or there's Santa Ana winds. Another good thing about growing in the containers when there's a Santa Ana is you can just put the strawberry, your container out of harm's way, like in the garage or something, until the fun storm finishes. So you could grow the June bears temporarily, like in your strawberry pot, if you just want to grow them as annuals. Some people will grow the June bears as annuals and then just get rid of them. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of makes sense because you're fiddling around with these plants for months after they actually produce fruit, right? So it just depends. But that's one thing you could do, and they will do okay until it gets fairly warm. So does that answer your question? One thing you can do to help the strawberry pot is to seal it with a spray. There's a ceramic, I think it's called ceramic seal or something. You could spray it really well. If you got a glazed ceramic strawberry pot, it's going to hold the moisture in better. However, you still have the problem of those little teeny weeny pockets for the roots. It's just not very sustainable. Remembering that the fruit on the strawberries is full of water, so it's going to need that constant water. When you do have those strawberry pots, you do need to water them 2 or 3 times a day, generally, when it gets warmer, when it's warm out, especially. That's the problem. So you know, when we have a hot day, you're just like, okay, I did it at 9, I got to go back out at 12. It's not always feasible, but they are pretty. They're very pretty. Now, there is something you can do, and I actually have it in my book, where you can put, to help with this, you can put a PVC pipe down the center with holes in it, and then you can water that, and then that will make sure that it stays moister. So you still have to water a lot, but that is another option that helps.
Do you water the pockets individually?
Yeah, you want to water the pockets individually, but with this PVC thing too, it will get into the center and flow out from there as well. Yeah, so it's basically the more water, the better. You know, of course, this whole thing with the people that are really into, you know, water conservation would be horrified. You're out there every 3 hours watering your 4 hours when it gets warm, watering your strawberry pot. But, you know, it's just a strawberry pot. So so those are some ideas for that.
And when you plant in those pockets, do you plant from the outside in, or do you plant from the inside out?
Good question about planting from the inside out or the outside in. Generally speaking, you fill it up with soil and you plant on the outside. Yeah. Yeah. So you would, yeah. So you can fill a lot of times you can fill the interior, right? And then you would, it's kind of a combination of putting some soil in and then putting the roots in and then putting more soil in. What you want to do is accommodate the roots where their roots are going to be able to spread out, but also go into the interior where they can get more soil and more moisture. But it's kind of hard sometimes because a lot of times there'll only be a little hole that goes into the center. So depending on the pot. Yes. Sorry. Okay, so the question is I'm glad you asked that question. What do you do with runners? And runners are they are new plants. That's when the strawberry plant is creating new plants. So what happens is it will create a long strand, a long stem, and at the end of that stem will grow some leaves, and then also there's going to be a place where the root it's going to start developing roots at the end of that, right? And so that's how the plants that's how these traditional berries are propagated, is they are propagated from their runners, and at the end of that stem is what's known as the daughter plant, so coming from the mother plant. So what you do then is you want to keep the mother and daughter connected until the daughter basically launches, takes flight, and that would be when that baby plant creates a fairly good root system. So you take, and I do have in here in the book, I do have a diagram of this process. So yeah, it's in here. So you take that and you put that in. There's a little nub at the bottom of it, and that's where the roots will come from. So even if there's not roots yet, they will. You stick that in a neighboring container or in the same container. So you can even like take a 4-inch pot, put it right next to a container, fill it with soil, and you stick it in there. Keep that soil moist. You can secure it to the soil with something like uh, little toothpicks or those forked hairpins. Those work really good, the forked hairpins. And so you can pin it in so that that area is going to stay connected with the soil, and then it will begin to grow roots. And then once it has a good root system, then is when you cut. Then when that's when you cut the plant. That's when you cut it, and you would cut it close to the plant at that point, and then cut the other off at the end because it's not going to do anything. So basically, the umbilical cord you no longer need at that point would be a good analogy. To determine if that baby is ready, you want to pull a little bit, kind of like you do with the kids, like push them a little, see if they're ready to fly or not. And if it's pretty secure, then that tells you it's time and you can take it off. If the reason you wouldn't want to take it off before is it doesn't have roots yet. So it's that the baby is being sustained by that umbilical cord to the mother at that point. Now, one thing to keep in mind about the day neutrals like Albion, like Seascape, is they don't tend to send out very many runners. The reason they don't send out runners is because a plant, when it is in a vegetative mode, meaning when it is propagating itself, it is not producing fruit. So the day neutrals are producing fruit throughout the year, so they are not vegetating at that point. They're propagating themselves. So that's another thing to keep in mind. However, they will sometimes. So if you see that, that's a good opportunity to go ahead and propagate the plant, just knowing that it's going to not be producing at that point, because it can't do both at the same time. It's kind of like, gestating a baby and not getting pregnant with another one or whatever kind of thing. I'm sure that's happened somewhere, but you get the point. So that's how that works. Does that answer your question with that? Okay, good. Any other questions? Yeah, I'll get just a sec. Okay.
So how do you prevent the bugs from getting in the strawberries?
Oh, good. I'm glad you mentioned that too. So how do you prevent the bugs from getting in the strawberries? Good question. So the one thing that I mentioned, pests and disease not being a big problem, meaning like diseases that affect, because there are some, but the pests that are a problem are the snails and the slugs and the sow bugs and also the bacteria in the soil. So a great thing to do to prevent them from getting in is to mulch with, a really good thing to mulch with is pine needles. Yes, because pine needles are serrated. And the serration, yeah, and I would suggest not trying it out because I thought they're not serrated, and yeah, it was painful. So it didn't look serrated, but the serration in the pine needles prevents the snails and the slugs from crawling, because the big pests of your berries are going to be snails, slugs, sow bugs. The sow bugs are the ones that make the little holes in them. Yeah. The sow bugs also don't like the pine needles very much either. Another thing that happens with the pine needles is that when the pest is trying to crawl on it, it's hard and it just falls, as opposed to being on more solid ground. So that really helps. The pine needles also will release a little bit of acidity into the soil, so that's a good thing as well. It also does double duty or triple duty because it will keep the berries off of the soil. Because what happens with that, when you go out and you look at a berry and you think, I'm going to have that for lunch, and then you go out and you pick it and the other side is all eaten away. So that's the bacteria in the soil. So the bacteria in the soil is just doing its job. Oh, there's fruit laying on us. We're going to start eating it. That's what they do. So you want to keep the berries off of the soil so that the bacteria doesn't have a chance to do its job. And then having the mulching with the pine needles. You can also use straw underneath too. So you could use straw and pine needles on top. As well, a combination kind of a thing. Also, having the nice thing about containers is you can have the berries hanging over the sides as well, so that keeps them off of there. So that's how you can prevent a lot of that. Now, there are other bigger critters that will come in and munch away, and I'm not including kids because it's okay if they do that, right? So, and dogs really like my dog, who's passed away now, but she loved the alpine strawberries. She would go out and ferret out the alpine strawberries. She had the more gourmet tastes. So the bigger ones, there are these little bags that you can get. They look like gift bags, but I've been trying them on my avocados, and you put them over the plant, and it will still let in light, and you kind of pull it, and that'll keep. So say you've got berries that are close and you're afraid that the possums or something is going to come through that night and have dine at your facilities while you're sleeping, then you can go ahead and do some of that. That's more like it's a manual preventative kind of technique as well. Yeah, so they're bags, and if you want to, I can send you information on it. Yeah, they look like little gift bags, but I've been putting them on my avocados so they're not gnawed on, and it's been working. So
The ones made out of netting?
yeah, they look like the yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, they look like more like those little gift bags that they put things in and give you. Yeah, so it actually has been working well. So that's another thing you can do when they're getting closer to being ripe for the bigger critters. And bunnies are a problem as well.
From like the Dollar Tree, the waste baskets that are like open, he turns them upside down and puts them
Oh yeah,
so that you still get the air circulation.
that's good. Yeah. So any kind of like that preventative barrier. So you're talking about the waste baskets with the slats in them, so that the light can still get in. And that's more of a thing like right towards harvest, when you know, like, you're not getting that. I'm going to have that berry. I put all this work in, all this effort. I've been watching it. I've been doing rain dances and berry dances, and I'm going to eat that berry. So the watering, as I mentioned, I definitely will want to. I may just weigh a bit so it's not dribbling everywhere here. But you do, after you pot up them, you want to thoroughly soak them. Even though this soil is moist, you still want to soak them so that as soon as they do start taking up water, they've got plenty of water to do that with. And let's see, I think that, yeah, I'm thinking if I haven't said anything, so I'll see what I've missed.
Should I water them? That's why they're one other one. How often should I?
Okay, so the question is, how often should you water the strawberries? Okay, that's going to vary throughout the year. It's going to vary throughout what's even happening out there. But as a rule of thumb, if you want to use a moisture meter, you can use a moisture meter. I would suggest using moisture meter and your finger. Basically, you want to water when only about the first inch or so dries out. You don't want them to go dry. The moisture meter, you would want to water them when the moisture meter is on the 4. So that's right before it goes into the 3. Another really good rule of thumb, you know what, I'm going to tell you about putting soil in after you've planted, because I forgot to mix them in when I was planting. But I'll tell you that trick in a minute. Another thing is the pickup test. So if you have a container, if you're growing in containers, obviously this is different than the soil, but when you pick it up and it's a lot lighter weight, then you know it's time to water. So that's another really good trick. Your finger, sticking that in, the first inch is dry or drying, and then you know it's time to water. Another thing you can use is a wooden skewer. So you put the skewer in. If it comes out and there's still, and you would want to do it in the first inch to 2 inches. And you also want to test down below too. If you think that something weird is happening, like maybe it's not draining good enough, then you can use the moisture meter or the wooden skewer. If it's very, very wet down below, but it's not as wet up top, then there may be a drainage issue. But the wooden skewer, when you pull it out, if all the soil falls off, that means the soil is dry, right? If you put it in and the soil clings and it's all wet, then that tells you too. So that gives you a few different ways. But you do want to check on them on a regular basis. And remembering, as soon as the humidity dips, we've got Santa Ana winds, you're going to be watering. It's raining, you're not going to be watering. What you want to do when it's raining is go out and make sure that the container is draining. So if you go out and someone recently gave me, it's unfortunate, she's a gardener, but she was busy moving. So she wasn't paying attention to things, I think, but she gave me a potted mango tree. It didn't occur to me that it didn't have drainage holes. So I went after the rain, and it wasn't doing good for it. She gave it to me like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's like, I don't understand why this tree's not doing so well. It had been dug up, so I thought, well, maybe it just got too stressed. But after the rain, I went out, there was a puddle in it, and I thought, oh my gosh. So I turned it over, sure enough, no drainage holes, and I drained it. So we'll see if I can, if it'll survive. But it's been through quite a bit, being ripped out of the ground, not with much roots, and in this container that's not draining for 3 weeks. So definitely check on all your drainage when we have rain. That's when you're going to know. When you see a puddle on top of the container, that means it's not draining. Sometimes you need to elevate them, so maybe they're just in like if they're on soil or something, they're just not getting enough drainage, so you want to put them up on something like some sort of a cinder block, something, whatever works to get some drainage going there too. And then fertilizing. Okay, so as mentioned, I didn't fertilize this. So one thing method that I suggest people use to fertilize already planted plants is to take a wooden skewer and make holes and then put the fertilizer in the little holes and then cover it and water. So that will get the fertilizer down to the root zone. There are fertilizer bags that will say, just sprinkle on top. And it's not, first of all, you have to remember it has to break down. Secondly, you don't know if it's going to disappear off the top, right? So you really want to get it at the root zone. Mycorrhizae, and this has mycorrhizae in it, is really good. It's a microscopic fungi that attaches to plant roots. And it's a microscopic fungi that attaches to plant roots. And it's really cool. And what it does is it goes out and it will get more water and more nutrients than the plant would on its own. And it's common out in nature. Most plants have their own mycorrhizae. So they have that here too. They have mycorrhizal products that have a lot of different types of mycorrhizae in them so their strawberries do have one that will attach to their roots. That's how they make them. That's how the roots get bigger and stronger and take in more nutrients and more water. They have developed this quite extensively, not for us home gardeners, once again, but so that they can have very strong root systems for golf courses. So that's what they've done a lot of the research for, because they want those nice green golf course, right? And there you can see where they've used mycorrhizae and not used, and there'll be little roots and big roots. So that's a really good addition to your soils, to your fertilizers as well. And that's another reason why you would want to make those holes, like I mentioned, and put the dry fertilizer in that way, so that you can get the mycorrhizae to the root zone where it belongs, where it needs to be.
So once you plant the strawberry, how often do you fertilize?
So good question. So how often to fertilize strawberries? It's ideally every 2 months. You don't want to go overboard with every month. You don't need to, but I would say every 2 to 3 months is a good rule of thumb. And then checking ideally, especially in a smaller container, checking every 6 months to a year the pH, adding soil sulfur periodically, or for if the fertilizer has sulfur in it, then you're probably going to be okay. Any other questions? I've answered them all. That's good. I'm thinking if there's anything else. I know we covered pests and diseases, we covered watering, we covered location. Yes. Okay, good question. So the question was, when fertilizing, so say I had used the fertilizer in this container, would I put it just in the holes or would I mix it throughout the soil? Usually when I am planting in a container, I will put it in the soil and mix it into the soil. That way it has a good distribution. It also helps, especially since this has sulfur in it, to acidify the soil as a unit rather than in one contained area. And also too, you run the risk a little bit of putting too much fertilizer in that planting hole where you could burn the roots. So it's better to mix it in and mix it in as thoroughly as possible. So I think that does it. And I do have my books for sale here, and you get a free autograph as well. So if you're interested in that, and then you can find, if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll be getting my monthly Garden Peeps newsletter. It just went out, but I'll send anyone who signed up today a copy of it, because it does have an article on growing strawberries in it as well. So you'll even have more information about that. So there you go. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming.